Welcome to Good News from St. Andrew's, Guelph. I'm your host, Rev John, and I'm the minister here at St. Andrew's. It is truly a pleasure to be with you each and every week here on Rogers TV 20. We look forward to bringing our service from the Sunday before to you into your homes on Wednesdays at 5 and a few other occasions through the week. And you might also be somebody who watches on Sundays at noon. Now, this sort of time difference might be a little confusing as we get closer to Easter. On Easter Sunday, we will be recording our service. It'll be live for those who join us live through Zoom and YouTube on the Sunday morning, but it'll be a recording on the Wednesday or the services through the week that are shown on Rogers TV 20. Don't be confused. Anytime you want to celebrate Easter and be a part of our service, feel that you're connected to the live event that we do each and every Sunday. We see you as a part of our community now as we are bringing these services on Rogers TV 20. We also hope that you had an opportunity to share in the sacrament of Holy Communion last week and know that we are again virtually connected as a community who is celebrating this great feast that God provides. Hopefully you were able to find a beverage-like substance and a bread-like substance, and you were able to participate in this spiritual food that nourishes us for the days ahead. I hope that's brought meaning to you as you continue on your journey of trying to follow Jesus, or even just exploring what that might mean for you and how that might make a difference in your daily living. We're grateful that you've joined us and are participating in this way. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about something that's pretty popular, actually, in just everyday culture. These are sort of events that come up throughout the year, and it's kind of curious in some ways because for a culture that doesn't really participate too much in the religious sphere or what you might call the sacred sphere of things, it's interesting how some of these things have become a part of our popular culture. So for those of you who are very much aware of what I'm talking about this week, and by the time we're broadcasting on Rogers, you'll actually probably have either celebrated it or it'll have already passed. This week is St. Patrick's Day. There's a few saints' days as a part of our tradition throughout our year. Probably a big part of that is just being a culture that was dominated and greatly influenced by the Christian tradition. So many of these days, these special days, have saints attached to them, St. Valentine's Day and certainly St. Patrick's Day as one. But you also will acknowledge, I'm sure, along with me, that these days have sort of a different flavor than probably what the Christian tradition was seeking to put forward as a way of celebrating these specific days. In fact, we often term these now as like Hallmark holidays, the days when you need to make sure you got a Valentine's Day card to send to somebody, or maybe a St. Patty's Day card to send to someone. And St. Patrick's Day is even more unique, and certainly in the community that we serve here in Guelph and sort of Kitchener-Waterloo and beyond, we hear a lot about St. Patrick's Day, and some of the things we hear are maybe not the most best things to celebrate a saint, you might say. It's certainly a time in the past, and I'm hoping that people are going to be safe and take precautions and, listen to the restrictions that are being asked for around social distance and having gatherings in group. But in the past, we know that we've seen huge gatherings of people around St. Patrick's Day as a way of celebrating that wonderful day that for a lot of folks celebrates a kind of Irish tradition. It's a time to get a lot of green, and for some reason it's also a time to find some green beer or celebrate things in a certain kind of way. It's interesting how those traditions have sort of evolved over time. Saints are an interesting thing in the Presbyterian Church as well, in our tradition, in the Protestant tradition, because saints aren't something that we tend to focus on very much. But it's curious because so many of our churches in the Presbyterian Church in Canada are actually named for a saint. And sometimes in some traditions and in some churches, you'll actually see when people talk about the Gospels, they'll refer to them as St. Luke or St. John or St. Matthew or St. Mark. So saints have still got something as a part of that. Now, in the tradition that we came from before we moved through the Reformation and became the Protestant church and became the Presbyterian church, the tradition that we were raised in as a church was very much about saints and continues that tradition to this day. You'll often hear about patron saints. Lots of countries across the world have a patron saint. You'll also hear about patron saints of specific causes. And you'll sometimes, I would say actually the good news about saints within the Catholic tradition has been that there's still more saints being raised up. I think that's really neat because in a way, a lot of our Christian tradition is sort of very much stuck in the past and, ancient tradition, things that happened a long time ago. But it's interesting and wonderful to see how some other folks have been raised up, even within our own generation, as saints. A couple that really stand out for me personally was the sainthood of Mother Teresa. On her passing, they went through a process, and it's a very involved process, to determine whether or not she could be beatified, is the language they use, or made into a saint. And Mother Teresa has been made a saint, so she's now Saint Mother or Saint Teresa of Calcutta. And I think that's amazing that way of connecting, even in our present day, that others could be raised up as someone called a saint. Another one that speaks to me very personally as well is Oscar Romero. He was the Archbishop in El Salvador during the war there, and just an amazing man who spoke out for injustice and was truly a man of his people. And he was murdered as a part of that, standing up against the government at that time. And so even recently, within the last decade or so, he also has been raised up as a saint, Saint Oscar Romero. But what is a saint? And what is that all about? And maybe why don't we have saints in the Protestant tradition? So let me just give you a couple of really brief ways of understanding this in the short time we share together. Saints really are considered these sort of very special, very holy people. And there's a whole bunch of things in the saint checklist that sort of need to happen as a part of that. Most saints will have been martyred, meaning there's so many saints that were martyred for standing up for their faith. And martyred might be a confusing word, but it's a word that basically means someone killed them, tortured them, was horrible to them, from either a different faith tradition, no faith tradition, a government, an empire like the Roman Empire, basically executed them, and they died. They died for standing by their convictions. That's often the case. Now, in other cases, they just simply died, but they lived an amazing life, what we would call a saintly life, a life that was so much about offering themselves to other people, of being, very kind and compassionate to others, offering their lives in a very sacrificial, you might say, kind of way. And so throughout the Christian tradition, for a very long time, saints were named through the church in Rome and were set apart as these kind of special people. And it's perceived in that tradition that those saints can intercede for you. You could pray to a saint for something to happen or for something to change in your life or in the lives of people you care about, or even in the world. When the Protestant tradition came along, the fixation that the Protestants had was that Jesus was it. That's the only person we need to pray to. That's the only person who intercedes for us. There's not a need for all these other beings. Because, as is typical of humans, in some cases, in some places, some of these saints became worshipped and elevated to a place that probably really wasn't what anyone had really intended, but it just sort of happened that way. And so to prevent that, the Protestant church said, Jesus is it. He's the only one. We don't need intercessors. We don't need to pray to other people. We don't need to pray to even Jesus' mother. We have direct access to Jesus, and that's all we need. But what's interesting is, still within the Protestant tradition, there's still a lot of saints as a part of names of churches. I serve a church called St. Andrew's. Many Presbyterian churches across the country are called St. Andrews. But I was also ordained at a church called St. David's, who's the patron saint of Russia and Wales. St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland. So it seems kind of appropriate culturally, but if we're a church that doesn't really focus on saints, why would we have a saint as a part of our name? And why, in a lot of our tradition, using the King James Bible, would we have the gospel writers being referred to as St. Luke and St. Mark? What's up with that? Well, for some reason, that's just what we have. There's still this sense of placing some kind of special status for these people who were saints within the Christian tradition. But even though we're called St. Andrew, there's nothing special about St. Andrew in specific within who we are. Again, it's in many ways it's tied to the culture, and that's kind of the connection I want to make here. Some of the things that we do in the Christian tradition, in fact, in a lot of faith traditions, is tied to the culture more so than the actual, sort of stance or theology or how one would articulate their faith. So some of the things we do are based on more about culture than about, hitting all the points around what we believe and everything else. So that's why it wouldn't be strange for Presbyterians to talk about St. Andrew as a church and not getting into some grand debate about, hey, we don't have saints in the church. That's not right. The other thing I just want to turn as we come to a close this morning is just thinking about how we talk about saints in the Protestant tradition. So in a sense, what we tried to say was that there was nobody really, people shouldn't be lifted up on pedestals and said that that's the saintly person. And there's something that I like about that as well. It's sort of a great equalizer. We all have the opportunity to be saintly, to be people who try to follow Jesus, to be people who want to make a difference in the world. Because sometimes I think that when we put certain people on these pedestals, when we move somebody to a special status, we feel like, well, we could never be Mother Teresa. We could never be Oscar Romero. That's not possible. We're not that good. We're not that kind of person. So I like within the Protestant tradition that it sort of says all of us have an opportunity to be a part of what the Protestant tradition calls the communion of saints, but also that's connected to something far deeper within our Christian tradition. This idea that we're all a part of a community of saints, a great sort of cloud of witnesses, a whole group of people who've tried to follow Jesus and who've done what they felt was best or have worked as hard as they can to offer themselves in love for another. So maybe today, think about the ways in which you, as you try to follow, are, in a way, your way of exercising your sainthood. Because we all have that level of sainthood. We're trying our best. We're not saints. We're not, we get things wrong. We make mistakes. But think about it maybe in that way, that this is part of trying to be an example in the world, trying to follow Jesus, failing sometimes, but sometimes really getting it right. And we think that's pretty good news. So today it's our service from March the 14th. We're still in the season of Lent, and we're going to talk about a text that comes from John's Gospel, chapter 3, verses 14 to 21. It's that John 3:16 that you see often posted at football games and baseball games and public occasions when we did public things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in worship today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, whatever that may look like for you. And know that throughout this day, you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, a communion of saints, a group of people that have come before you, that are connected to you, that are encouraging you, and are wishing you the very best, along with Jesus and with the divine. So may you have a great day today, and may that be your good news that you can share with someone else.